Hi everybody and welcome to my kitchen. I am Casey from the Idaho Wheat Commission and we are doing a version of our quarantine kitchen today. I don't know about you, but I have been wanting to snack constantly recently. So today we are going to do a very quick recipe of zucchini bread. I think banana bread has had its day, so let's switch it up a little bit. And this way at least I feel like I'm getting a portion of vegetables. Don't really know if that's true, but it makes me feel better. This recipe has been adapted over the years out of my very trusty cookbook, and I have some handwritten notes in there that I think make it the best version. So I'm going to show that today. And I want you to start by preheating your oven to 350 degrees. And one good tip anytime that you're making bread or really baking anything, but you want to maybe buy a thermometer that you can put inside the oven, and that way you know that your oven temperature is correct. A lot of times our gauge is not very accurate on top, and especially if you're going to put all that time in for a yeast bread, you want to make sure that you are putting it in the right temperature. Okay, so starting with the ingredients, of course the very most important thing is we want to start with a high quality flour, and today we are using actually a local flour from Gaston's Bakery. And we were very fortunate to meet the owner recently, Matthew, in our offices, and so we knew he was making his own flour for his own purposes, but it was really exciting to find this flour in a local supermarket recently when it was very hard to find other flours. So we're going to start with 1.5 cups of this all-purpose flour, and this is a quick bread, so we are going to be using a quick acting leavener, and there's actually two, baking soda and baking powder, and we're going to be using both of them today in our recipe. So we're going to start with 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, nice and level. We want to do 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. And one good tip that my mom always says is get all of your ingredients out at the beginning and then start putting them away as you use them. And with my space here today, I'm just going to put them to the side, but then you know that you've put everything in that the recipe calls for. Okay, so the next is 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Usually we want to be really precise with any ingredients when we're baking, but there's one exception that I like to make, and that is with the spices. And this recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, but if you do kind of a heaping teaspoon, it's never gonna hurt anything. I think a little bit of extra cinnamon is always good for us. And then the other one is ginger, and it calls for 1/4 teaspoon, and again, I do a little bit more than 1/4 through a heaping teaspoon, and I think it just gives it a little bit of an extra kick to your bread. Okay, so that is it for your dry ingredients. And just mix that up a little bit so that it's well incorporated. And then we're gonna switch bowls for our wet ingredients. And I will say that when I'm doing this on my own, I usually start with the wet ingredients in the big bowl, and then I just add the dry ingredients so that we don't make any more dishes, because I don't think any of us wanna be washing extra if we don't have to. Okay, so our wet ingredients, we have 2 eggs that have been whisked. That's easier to incorporate next. Okay, and then we have sugar, and again, usually you want to be very precise on this because baking really is kind of a chemical reaction, but I do sometimes take liberty on the sugar, and it calls for 1 cup, but this is more closer to 3/4 cup, just because I don't want it that sweet. And then the next thing is the recipe calls for 1/4 cup of oil, but I really like to substitute it for applesauce, but I have learned over the years that if I'm substituting, I do want to double it to 1/2 cup. So conveniently, these little snack packs are about exactly 1/2 cup, and so I really don't even measure. So I just make sure that all gets in there. Okay, and then of course the star of the show is the zucchini, and it calls for about 1 cup of zucchini, and I have that shredded here. And again, I add a little bit of extra zucchini. I know I keep saying that we're supposed to be precise, but this is one of the great things about this recipe is that it is a little bit flexible, and I think adding a little bit of extra zucchini, 1, makes it more of a salad, and 2, I do think that it helps with the moisture. There may be some expert bakers out there that want to challenge me on that, but that's what I have found over the years. So we're going to incorporate all of this wet ingredients together because we're going to add it into our dry ingredients and want to make sure that it's evenly distributed with all of the sugar especially, and these eggs that are going to bind all of our bread here. Okay, so that is easy. And then we just add that right into our dry ingredients. Trying to be Food Network here and not quite there. It's just my tryout. All right, and then we just want to incorporate that really well. And I would mention that you can also kind of get creative on this. You can put in walnuts or pecans if you want, or I've even had a couple people recently suggest chocolate chips. I have never done that, but that sounds amazing and would definitely spice up a little bit of this zucchini bread, so that would be great. And so now while we're incorporating this, I am going to say that you want to make sure that you have a oiled bread pan, loaf pan, and that will help us really get our zucchini bread out when it's all finished. Okay, so that's pretty well incorporated there. And the other thing is you could decide if you wanted to do mini loaves. I do mini loaves a lot because this bread is really easy to freeze. And so if I do the mini loaves, it's just kind of a better portion. So there you go, it's all incorporated. And we're gonna grab our oiled pan here. And if you are gonna do the mini loaves, I always like to double the recipe because I think that it only makes about 2 mini loaves. And if you're gonna go to all of the trouble, although it's really 10 minutes of trouble, I do like to have a couple more mini loaves, and then I can freeze them or give them away to friends or eat them all in one day. Whatever you want to do, that's perfect. Okay, so there we go. We have our loaf pan all ready to go, and we're gonna put this into the oven for about 40 minutes. The recipe calls for 50, but I find that it usually bakes a little bit faster. So we're gonna check after 40 minutes. Okay everyone, through the magic of the internet, we now have our fully baked zucchini bread loaf. You can see we have a really nice color here. I've obviously let it cool for a couple minutes, but I do want to show you the toothpick test. You take one and put it all the way through the center, and if it comes out without any crumbs or any batter, you know that it has baked. Now this baked for 40 minutes, and I'm gonna take a knife and I'm just gonna loosen the sides a little bit, and I can tell that our oil really did the trick because it's loosened very easily. And then you can take a plate, or in this case, an Idaho wheat cutting board. You just put it on top, flip it over. I can tell that it came out nice and easy. Still steaming a little bit. And there you have your Idaho wheat and Idaho milled flour zucchini bread loaf. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this version of our quarantine kitchen and that you enjoy trying this recipe out at home. From everybody at the Idaho Wheat Commission, take care.